a WikiVidi Documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. 2002 Gujarat Riots. The 2002 Gujarat Riots, also known as the 2002 Gujarat Violence and the Gujarat Pogrom, was a 3-day period of inter-communal violence in the western Indian state of Gujarat. Following the initial incident, there were further outbreaks of violence in Ahmedabad for 3 months. Statewide, there were further outbreaks of communal riots against the minority Muslim population for the next year. The burning of a train in Godhra on the 27th of February 2002, which caused the deaths of 58 Hindu pilgrims karsevaks returning from Ayodhya, is cited as having instigated the violence. According to official figures, the riots ended with 1,044 dead, 223 missing, and 2,500 injured. Of the dead, 790 were Muslim and 254 Hindu. The Concerned Citizens Tribunal Report estimated that as many as 1,926 may have been killed. Other sources estimated death tolls in excess of 2,000. Many brutal killings and rapes were reported on, as well as widespread looting and destruction of property. The Chief Minister of Gujarat at that time, Narendra Modi, was accused of initiating and condoning the violence, as were police and government officials who allegedly directed the rioters and gave lists of Muslim-owned properties to them. In 2012, Modi was cleared of complicity in the violence by special investigation team appointed by the Supreme Court of India. The CIT also rejected claims that the state government had not done enough to prevent the riots. The Muslim community was reported to have reacted with anger and disbelief. In July 2013, allegations were made that the CIT had suppressed evidence. That December, an Indian court upheld the earlier CIT report and rejected a petition seeking Modi's prosecution. In April 2014, the Supreme Court expressed satisfaction over the CIT's investigations in 9 cases related to the violence, and rejected as baseless a plea contesting the CIT report. Though officially classified as a communalist riot, the events of 2002 have been described as a pogrom by many scholars, with some commentators alleging that the attacks had been planned, with the attack on the train was a staged trigger for what was actually premeditated violence. Other observers have stated that these events had met the legal definition of genocide, or referred to them as state terrorism or ethnic cleansing. Instances of mass violence include the Naradapatiya massacre that took place directly adjacent to a police training camp, the Gulbarg Society massacre where Ahsan Jaffrey, a former parliamentarian, was among those killed, and several incidents in Vadodara city. Martha Nussbaum said that there is by now a broad consensus that the Gujarat violence was a form of ethnic cleansing, that in many ways it was premeditated, and that it was carried out with the complicity of the state government and officers of the law. Godhra train burning. On the morning of the 27th of February 2002, the Sabarmati Express, returning from Ayodhya to Ahmedabad, stopped near the Godhra railway station. Several of the passengers were Hindu pilgrims, returning from Ayodhya after a religious ceremony at the site of the demolished Babri Masjid. Per newspaper reports published prior to the incident, the karsevaks had been making a nuisance of themselves for some time, troubling other passengers and forcing them to shout, "Jai Shri Ram." An argument erupted between the train passengers and the vendors on the railway platform, as the karsevaks refused to pay for their tea and snacks. Later inquiries with other train passengers revealed that the karsevaks had been doing this since departing Ayodhya at many other railway stations including Dahod. The argument became violent, and under uncertain circumstances 4 coaches of the train caught fire with many people trapped inside. In the resulting conflagration, 59 people burned to death. The government of Gujarat set up Gujarat High Court Judge K.G. Shah as a one-man commission to look into the incident, but following outrage among families of victims and in the media over Shah's alleged closeness to Modi, retired Supreme Court Judge G.T. Nanavati was added as chairman of the now 2-person commission. After 6 years going over the details, the commission submitted its preliminary report, which concluded that the fire was an act of arson committed by a mob of 1,000 to 2,000 locals. Maulvi Hussain Haji Ibrahim Mamaji, a cleric in Godhra, and a dismissed Central Reserve Police Force officer named Nanyumian were presented as the masterminds behind the arson. After 24 extensions, the Commission submitted its final report on the 18th of November 2014. The findings of the Commission were called into question by a video recording released by Telka magazine, which showed Ovin Pandya, counsel for the Gujarat government, stating that the findings of the Shah Nanavati Commission would support the view presented by the Bharatiya Janata Party, as Shah was their man, and Nanavati could be bribed. In February 2011, the trial court convicted 31 people and acquitted 63 others based on the murder and conspiracy provisions of the Indian Penal Code, saying the incident was a pre-planned conspiracy. Of those convicted, 11 were sentenced to death and the other 20 to life in prison. Maulvi Amaji, presented by the Nanavati Shah Commission as the prime conspirator, was acquitted along with 62 others accused for lack of evidence. The union government led by the Indian National Congress Party in 2005 also set up a committee to probe the incident, headed up by retired Supreme Court Judge Umesh Chandra Banerjee. The committee concluded that the fire had begun inside the train, and was most likely accidental. However, the Gujarat High Court ruled in 2006 that the matter was outside the jurisdiction of the union government, and that the committee was therefore unconstitutional. The Concerned Citizens Tribunal concluded that the fire had been an accident. Several other independent commentators have also concluded that the fire itself was almost certainly an accident, saying that the initial cause of the conflagration has never been conclusively determined. Historian Ainsley Thomas Embry stated that the official story of the attack on the train was entirely baseless. Post-Godhra violence. Following the attack on the train, the Vishva Hindu Parishad called for a statewide ban, or strike, although the Supreme Court had declared such strikes to be unconstitutional and illegal, and despite the common tendency for such strikes to be followed by violence, no action was taken by the state to prevent the strike. The government did not attempt to stop the initial outbreak of violence across the state. Independent reports indicate that the state BJP President Rana Rajendra Shine had endorsed the strike, and that Modi and Rana used inflammatory language which worsened the situation. Then Chief Minister Narendra Modi declared that the attack on the train had been an act of terrorism, and not an incident of communal violence. Local newspapers and members of the state government used the statement to incite violence against the Muslim community by claiming, without proof, that the attack on the train was carried out by Pakistan's intelligence agency and that local Muslims had conspired with them to attack Hindus in the state. False stories were also printed by local newspapers which claimed that Muslim people had kidnapped and raped Hindu women. Numerous accounts describe the attacks on the Muslim community that began on the 28th of February as highly coordinated, with mobile phones and government-issued printouts listing the homes and businesses of Muslims. Attackers arrived in Muslim communities across the region in trucks, wearing saffron robes and khaki shorts and bearing a variety of weapons. In many cases, attackers damaged or burned Muslim-owned or occupied buildings while leaving adjacent Hindu buildings untouched. Although many calls to the police were made from victims, they were told by the police that, "We have no orders to save you." In some cases, the police fired on Muslims who attempted to defend themselves. The rioters used mobile phones to coordinate their attacks. By the end of the day on the 28th of February, a curfew had been declared in 27 towns and cities across the state. A government minister stated that although the circumstances were tense in Baroda and Ahmedabad, the situation was under control, and that the police who had been deployed were enough to prevent any violence. In Baroda, the administration imposed a curfew in 7 areas of the city. M.D. Antani, then the Deputy Superintendent of Police, deployed the Rapid Action Force to sensitive areas in Godhra. Gordon Zardafia, the State Home Minister, believed there would be no retaliation from the Hindu community for the train burning. Modi stated that the violence was no longer as intense as it had been, and that it would soon be brought under control, and that if the situation warranted it, the police would be supported by deploying the army. A shoot-to-kill order was issued. However, the troop deployment was withheld by the state government until 1 March, when the most severe violence had ended. After more than 2 months of violence, a unanimous vote to authorize central intervention was passed in the upper house of parliament. Members of the opposition made accusations that the government had failed to protect Muslim people in the worst rioting in India in more than 10 years. It is estimated that 230 mosques and 274 dargahs were destroyed during the violence. For the first time in the history of communal riots, Hindu women took part, looting Muslim shops. It is estimated that up to 150,000 people were displaced during the violence. It is estimated that 200 police officers died while trying to control the violence. And Human Rights Watch reported that acts of exceptional heroism were committed by Hindus, Dalits and tribals who tried to protect Muslims from the violence. Attacks on Muslims. In the aftermath of the violence, it became clear that many attacks were focused not only on Muslim populations, but also on Muslim women and children. Organizations such as Human Rights Watch criticized the Indian government and the Gujarat state administration for failure to address the resulting humanitarian condition of victims who fled their homes for relief camps during the violence, the overwhelming majority of them Muslim. According to Cited on the 28th of February, in the districts of Morjari Chowk and Charadiya Chowk in Ahmedabad, of all 40 people who had been killed by police shooting were Muslim. An international fact-finding committee formed of all women international experts from US, UK, France, Germany and Sri Lanka reported sexual violence was being used as a strategy for terrorizing women belonging to minority community in the state. It is estimated that at least 250 girls and women were gang raped and then burned to death. Children were force-fed petrol and then set on fire. Pregnant women were gutted and then had their unborn child's body shown to them. In the Narada Patia mass grave of 96 bodies, 46 were women. Rioters also flooded homes and electrocuted entire families inside. Violence against women also included them being stripped naked, violated with objects, and then killed. According to Kalpana Kanabiran, the rapes were part of a well-organized, deliberate and pre-planned strategy, and which facts place the violence into the categories of political pogrom and genocide. Other acts of violence against women included acid attacks, beatings and the killing of women who were pregnant. Children were also killed in front of their parents. George Fernandez, in a discussion in Parliament on the violence, caused widespread furor in his defense of the state government, saying that this was not the first time that women had been violated and raped in India. Children were killed by being burnt alive, and those who dug the mass graves described the bodies interred within them as burned and butchered beyond recognition. Children and infants were speared and held aloft before being thrown into fires. Describing the sexual violence perpetrated against Muslim women and girls, Renu Khan writes that the survivors reported that it consisted of forced nudity, mass rapes, gang rapes, mutilation, insertion of objects into bodies, cutting of breasts, slitting the stomach and reproductive organs, and carving of Hindu religious symbols on women's body parts. The Concerned Citizens Tribunal characterized the use of rape as an instrument for the subjugation and humiliation of a community. Testimony heard by the committee stated that a chilling technique, absent in pogroms unleashed hitherto, but very much in evidence this time in a large number of cases, was the deliberate destruction of evidence. Barring a few, in most instances of sexual violence, the women victims were stripped and paraded naked, then gang raped, and thereafter quartered and burned beyond recognition. The leaders of the mobs even raped young girls, some as young as 11 years old, before burning them alive. Even a 20-day-old infant, or a fetus in the womb of its mother, was not spared. Vandana Shiva stated that young boys have been taught to burn, rape and kill in the name of Hindutva. Dion Buncher, writing on the Gulbarg Society massacre and murder of Ahsan Jaffrey, has said that when Jaffrey begged the crowd to spare the women, he was dragged into the street and forced to parade naked for refusing to say Jai Shri Ram. He was then beheaded and thrown onto a fire, after which rioters returned and burned Jaffrey's family, including 2 small boys, to death. After the massacre, Gulbarg remained in flames for a week. Attacks on Hindus. The Times of India reported that over 10,000 Hindus were displaced during the violence. According to police records, 157 riots after the Godhra incident were started by Muslims. In Mahajanobando, a Hindu residential area in Jamalpur, residents reported that Muslim attackers injured approximately 25 Hindu residents and destroyed 5 houses on the 1st of March. The community head reported that the police responded quickly, but were ineffectual as there were so few of them present to help during the attack. The colony was later visited by Modi on the 6th of March, who promised the residents that they would be taken care of. On the 17th of March, it was reported that Muslims attacked Dalits in the Dana Limda area of Ahmedabad. In Himatnagar, a man was reportedly found dead, with both his eyes gouged out. The Sindhi Market and Pandarai Pole areas of Ahmedabad were also reportedly attacked by mobs. India Today reported on the 20th of May 2002 that there were sporadic attacks on Hindus in Ahmedabad. On the 5th of May, Muslim rioters attacked Bulwar's locality in the Shah Alam area. Hindu doctors were asked to stop practicing in Muslim areas after one Hindu doctor was stabbed. Frontline magazine reported that in Ahmedabad, of the 249 bodies recovered by the 5th of March, 30 were Hindu. Of the Hindus that had been killed, 13 had died as a result of police action, and several others had died while attacking Muslim-owned properties. Despite the relatively few attacks by Muslim mobs on Hindu neighborhoods, 24 Muslims were reported to have died in police shootings. Media coverage. The events in Gujarat were the first instance of communal violence in India in the age of 24-hour news coverage and were televised worldwide. This coverage played a central role in the politics of the situation. Media coverage was generally critical of the Hindu right. However, the BJP portrayed the coverage as an assault on the honour of Gujaratis and turned the hostility into an emotive part of their electoral campaign. With the violence receding in April, a peace meeting was arranged at Sabarmati Ashram, a former home of Mahatma Gandhi. Hindutva supporters and police officers attacked almost a dozen journalists. The state government banned television news channels critical of the government's response, and local stations were blocked. 2 reporters working for Star News were assaulted several times while covering the violence. On a return trip from having interviewed Modi when their car was surrounded by a crowd, one of the crowd claimed that they would be killed should they be a member of a minority community. The Editors Guild of India, in its report on media ethics and coverage on the incident, stated that the news coverage was exemplary, with only a few minor lapses. The local newspapers Sandesh and Gujarat Samachar, however, were heavily criticized. The report states that Sandesh had headlines which would provoke, communalize and terrorize people. The newspaper also used a quote from a VHP leader as a headline, "Avenge with blood." The report stated that Gujarat Samachar had played a role in increasing the tensions, but did not give all of its coverage over to hawkish and inflammatory reportage in the first few weeks. The paper carried reports to highlight communal harmony. Gujarat Today was given praise for showing restraint and for the balanced reportage of the violence. Critical reporting on the Gujarat government's handling of the situation helped bring about the Indian government's intervention in controlling the violence. The Editors Guild rejected the charge that graphic news coverage aggravated the situation, saying that the coverage exposed the horrors of the riots as well as the supine if not complicit attitude of the state, helping to propel remedial action. Allegations of state complicity. Many scholars and commentators have accused the state government of being complicit in the attacks, either in failing to exert any effort to quell the violence or for actively planning and executing the attacks themselves. The United States Department of State ultimately banned Narendra Modi from traveling to the United States due to his alleged role in the attacks. These allegations center around several facts. First, the state did little to quell the violence, with attacks continuing well through the spring. Further, some attackers used voter lists and other documents obtainable only with government assistance in order to target Muslim communities and households. Moreover, the Vishva Hindu Parishad, as well as many politicians, including Modi, made inflammatory remarks and endorsed the statewide ban further stoking tensions. The historian Gyanendra Pandey described these attacks as state terrorism, saying that they were not riots, but organized political massacres. According to Paul Brass, the only conclusion from the evidence which is available points to a methodical anti-Muslim pogrom which was carried out with exceptional brutality coordination. The media has described the attacks as state terrorism rather than communal riots, due to the lack of state intervention. Many politicians downplayed the incidents, claiming that the situation was under control. One minister who spoke with Rediff.com stated that though the circumstances were tense in Baroda and Ahmedabad, the situation was under control, and that the police who had been deployed were enough to prevent any violence. The Deputy Superintendent of Police stated that the Rapid Action Force had been deployed to sensitive areas in Godhra, Gordon Zardafia. The State Home Minister stated that he believed there would be no retaliation from the Hindu community once troops were airlifted in on March 1. Modi stated that the violence was no longer as intense as it had been and that it would soon be brought under control. The violence continued for 3 months with no intervention from the federal government till May. Local and state-level politicians were seen leading violent mobs, restraining the police and arranging the distribution of weapons, leading investigative reports to conclude that the violence was engineered and launched. Throughout the violence, attacks were made in full view of police stations and police officers who did not intervene. In many instances, police joined the mobs in perpetrating violence. At one Muslim locality, of the 29 deaths, 16 were caused by police firing into the locality. Some rioters even had printouts of voter registration lists, allowing them to selectively target Muslim properties. Selective targeting of properties was shown by the destruction of the offices of the Muslim Waqf Board, which was located within the confines of the high security zone and just 500 meters from the office of the Chief Minister. According to Scott W. Hibbard, the violence had been planned far in advance, and that similar to other instances of communal violence, the Bajrang Dal, the VHP and the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh all took part in the attacks. Following the attack on the train, the VHP called for a statewide ban, and the state took no action to prevent this. The Concerned Citizens Tribunal Report includes testimony of the then Gujarat BJP Minister Haran Pandya, who testified about an evening meeting convened by Modi the evening of the train burning. At this meeting, officials were instructed not to obstruct the Hindu rage following the incident. The report also highlighted a second meeting, held in Lunawada village of Pank Mahal district, attended by State Ministers Ashok Bhatt and Prabhashin Chauhan, among other BJP and RSS leaders, where detailed plans were made on the use of kerosene and petrol for arson and other methods of killing. The Jamiat Ulama-i-Hind claimed in 2002 that some regional Congress workers collaborated with the perpetrators of the violence. Deepankar Gupta believes that the state and police were clearly complicit in the violence, but that some officers were outstanding in the performance of their duties, such as Himanshu Bhatt and Rahul Sharma. Sharma was reported to have said, "I don't think any other job would have allowed me to save so many lives." Human Rights Watch has reported on acts of exceptional heroism by Hindus, Dalits and tribals who tried to protect Muslims from the violence. In response to allegations of state involvement, Gujarat government spokesman, Bharat Pandya, told the BBC that the rioting was a spontaneous Hindu backlash fueled by widespread anger against Muslims. He said, "Hindus are frustrated over the role of Muslims in the ongoing violence in Indian-administered Kashmir and other parts of India." In support of this, the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, John Hanford, expressed concern over religious intolerance in Indian politics, and said that while the rioters may have been aided by state and local officials, he did not believe that the BJP-led central government was involved in inciting the riots. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?